Welcome to this episode of Close the Deal Without Selling. Here's your host, Ike Krieger.
Hello again. This is Ike Krieger. Welcome back. Here are just a couple of the topics that we're going to be covering today. There's no right way to sell. You sell your way, others sell their way, or is there a right way to sell? Also, we'll cover one of my favorite selling statements, which is, telling ain't selling. And we'll end up this episode talking about a sales affliction that many of you already have. I can't teach you to sell. You already know how to sell. You've been selling since you were a baby. How you got the people around you to change your diapers, how you got a cookie from mommy, and how you got your bedtime moved from 8:30 to 9 o'clock were all based on your ability to communicate, convince, and influence. You were trying to get what you wanted or needed from someone else. Although it may not seem like it, you were selling and closing the deal. Traditional sales training teaches you how to be more effective at doing what you've been doing since you were a baby. If, as a younger person, you got what you wanted by talking, yelling, crying, whining, bullying, batting your eyelashes, or just by being persistent, you probably communicate and sell that way now. Over the years, you may have added a few productive communications and sales techniques to your getting what you want strategy, but for the most part, you sell like you did when you were young. Your approach to sales is based on your early life communication strategies. I'm once again referring to the habit of selling using your convincing and influencing skills. You've developed this over a long period of time, and change is a challenge. But is there a right way to sell? If you have a preset idea as to the right way to sell, please set it aside for a moment. The reason I ask you to set it aside is because there is no right way or wrong way to sell. There are just different ways to sell. And when you position yourself inside of the box called, I already know how to sell, or I'm already an effective communicator, you get yourself into trouble. Climb out of the box labeled, I know how to sell. As a matter of fact, get rid of the I already know how to box entirely. Here's an exercise that illustrates just how stuck in the box most of us are. Now, without hesitation, answer this question. Would you jump out of an airplane without a parachute for $2 million? I can hear your answer here in Los Angeles. As a matter of fact, say it again for me. Okay, your answer was no. What if I told you that airplane was sitting on the ground? Oops, well, that's different, but too late. No $2 million. It's gone. And you know what they say, at our age, every $2 million helps. You made your choice based on what you believe to be true. You responded without having all of the facts. Now, you may have felt somewhat pressured by my request for an instant response, but isn't that what we have to do every day? Your response was guided by your predetermined notion of what was true. What you thought was true, which leads us back to the relationship with what's true for us versus facts. Just because you believe something is true, that doesn't make it true. It just makes it true for you. And your truth could cost you $2 million. The exercise we just completed clearly proved that. Let go of what you assume to be true about your communications and sales effectiveness. Create a new truth for yourself. Learn to sell again. Once I developed the easier way to sell, I became even less of a fan of show and tell selling. Show and tell selling is a no-win situation unless somebody is prepared to buy and your show and tell doesn't screw it up. Show and tell selling is a perfect example of talking more than you listen. And when you talk more than you listen, you end up telling people why they should do or buy something. When you use the easier way to sell, you ask questions and listen to your prospect tell you exactly why they should do or buy something. Once again, when you say it, it's selling. When they say it, it's true. When you're telling, you give information. When you're selling, you solve problems. When you're telling, you take over the driver's seat and try to control the sale. When you're selling, you give up the driver's seat and act as a guide or navigator. When you're telling, you make a presentation so you can get them to see things your way. When you're selling, you conduct an effective sales interview and leave the decision-making to the prospect. When you're telling, you ask for the sale. When you're selling, you let the prospect choose the next step in the process. When you're telling, you recite features and benefits. And when you're selling, you ask questions that will uncover problems. When you're telling, you'll do anything to avoid rejection, including giving away valuable information for free and accept responses like maybe or I want to think about it as a real step forward. When you're selling, you accept the risk and the reward of a rejection by requesting an early no, especially if that no was going to happen anyway. When you're telling, you give knowledge that's based on your point of view. When you're selling, you're asking questions and listening closely so you can determine your prospect's point of view. When you're telling, you believe that a sale occurs on a logical level. When you're selling, you seek to understand and uncover both the prospect's emotional and logical needs. When you're telling, you're usually opinionated and reactive. And when you're selling, you're curious, authentic, neutral, and proactive. Let's turn that around a little and say, start selling, stop telling. Okay, 20% of your customers will yield 80% of your profit. 20% of your customers will yield 80% of your sales. And 20% of your customers will yield 80% of your problems. Here's a concept that'll help you focus on how to increase your revenues and productivity 20 to 50% over the next 6 to 12 months. And you do that by getting the business you probably should have gotten anyway, but didn't. Let me clarify. Let's use a bell curve to illustrate. And for those of you who need a refresher on a bell curve, it's a measuring graph shaped like a bell. The bell shape is higher in the middle and lower on the sides. So follow with me as I draw you a verbal picture. Imagine a bell-shaped curve. For this illustration, the entire bell represents a total of 100 prospects. And the prospects on the right side of the curve are more likely to buy from you than the ones on the left. The top 20% on the right side of the bell curve are the sales you should be making just by going out and seeing the people. The people in the first 20% on the right are actually waiting for you. And obviously, you do have to put in some work to locate that top 20%. They just are not going to come knocking at your door. And this group is found distributed all the way over on the right-hand area of the graph. These are the prospects who have a problem you solve, and they want it solved sooner rather than later. The prospects distributed in the 90 to 100% region, the top 10% on the right side of the curve, have been itching to buy what you sell, but either didn't know someone who could get them the product or service, or didn't know how to get the product or service on their own. Once you show up and offer it to prospects in this group, they will buy. In sales circles, this is known as a slam dunk. Now, the next 10% of the product distribution is in the 80 to 90% range. Still part of that top 20%. These prospects will buy also, but they may have a few questions or concerns before they sign on the dotted line, but they will buy. The first 20% on the left side of the graph will not buy from you under any circumstances. They are a no, and they are not going to change their mind. This is the group that causes you so much of your sales frustration. Before you discovered the easier way to sell, you believed that if you gave any of these hard no's enough information and handled their objections effectively, you could turn that no into a yes. You may have even experienced sales training tips that urged you to take a no as a request for more information. You may have even been advised that when you get a no, that's when the sale actually begins. Take a memo to yourself. In the majority of cases, when you get a no, it actually means no. You most likely spend way too much time trying to turn these real no's into yeses. Not good. Now let's go back to the right-hand side of the bell curve. We've addressed the 80 to 100% distribution, so let's move down a little bit to the prospects found in the 70 to 80% group. Here's where your sales challenges increase. In this 10%, you come across prospects that you thought were going to become a sale and then didn't. It's hard to imagine anyone who's been in sales for any amount of time not being able to recall at least a few prospects who fit in this description. These are the prospects you knew were going to buy, but they didn't. You were sure enough that you either mentally or actually spent the commission dollars that this sale was going to produce. You even assured your significant other that the deal would close. And then something happened. Or more precisely, nothing happened. You walked away from this surprising reversal of fortune shaking your head and wondering what happened. It probably seemed like you and your prospect just ended up on different channels. Well, you hit it on the head. Something in your communication process with this prospect broke down and you lost your sale. The easier way to sell is specifically designed to get every one of those prospects in that 10% range to become a long-term, loyal, paying client. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that this system would give you an opportunity to increase your business by 20% to 50% over the next 6 to 12 months. Although math is not my specialty, it would seem that if you're successful in providing your product or service to the first 20% of the bell curve, in this example, 20 prospects, and you add 10% more on top of that, that translates to an increased effectiveness ratio of 50%. You're already going to get the top 20%. Now you need to get the next 10 people. If you get the next 10 people on top of the 20 people you already have, you've increased your business by 50%. Even if you're not successful in getting everyone in the next 10%, let's say you get half of them, you will still have increased your business by how much? That's right, 25%. Who wouldn't be satisfied with an increase of business of 25%? People constantly ask me, but what happens to all of those other prospects past that 30% market? Well, the good news is you're probably going to turn some of those contacts into contracts and increase your effectiveness even further. But uncovering a no that was going to happen anyway removes the stress from trying to sell something to someone that they just don't want. This bell curve exercise is based on probability and can be laid on top of society in almost any given matter. 30% want and need what you have, even though a few of the grouping might take more work than the others. Remember, on the other side of the curve are 30% who will never agree with you or never buy from you. Just like in politics, everything in the center 40% is up for grabs. Narrow your market to the 30% who want and need what you have to offer. The moral of this story is to narrow your market to those in the yes zone. Focus on that 30% of high potential prospects that reside on the right-hand side of the bell curve, because these prospects are ready, willing, and able to buy and want to buy from you. Imagine the anxiety, frustration, and stress that will disappear because you no longer have to deal with prospects that require a great deal of convincing and influencing, especially those who were going to say no anyway. Are you plagued by the sales affliction called answeritis? The symptoms of this affliction are readily identifiable. You have an uncontrolled need to respond to a statement made by a prospect as if they just asked a question. For instance, your prospect might say, "Well, your product is more expensive than your competitors." Rather than just saying, "Yes, that seems to be true," you have a tendency to respond with a justification for your prices being what they are, as well as an explanation of how you arrived at those prices. Learn to recognize the difference between a statement and a question. Learn to wait for a question to be asked before you come up with an answer. In most cases, if you volunteer an answer without a question being asked, that answer will end up coming back to haunt you. Well, that's it for this episode. Remember, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, please contact us at closethedealwithoutselling@gmail.com. In my estimation, we have some great episodes coming up. In those episodes, I'll make sure I explain what you can do to make this system work even better for you. And you know, when it comes to you, I do what I say I'm going to do. This is Krieger. I will see you next time.